When you consider the tongue in the context of the human body, the whole body, it's a small thing, seemingly insignificant, often hidden from sight. It's not a prominent member, I guess, and yet its capacity is immense. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things.
Welcome to Encounter the Truth with Jonathan Griffiths. We continue our study of the book of James today. Our series is called Doers of the Word, and today we begin to look at the power of the tongue. And Jonathan, why do you think that James spent so much time focusing on the effect of the tongue?
I think this is an area where we Christians can give ourselves a bit of a pass on our behavior. You know, other areas of godliness or ungodliness that are maybe more visible, we can treat with greater seriousness, but we think, oh, our words, you know, they're here and then they're gone and they float off in the air and they perhaps leave no real record. And we think, oh, it doesn't really matter what I say, especially if not too many people hear it, you know.
Yeah.
It's not that important. And James says this is a huge area of godliness. And actually the potential to do damage, we underestimate it. Actually, we can do huge damage with our words. And he wants to teach us this is a core area of godliness. And this is one key area, among others, but a key area where our faith will be shown to be genuine or not genuine in the way in which we speak.
Well, let's look at what James does say. We're in chapter 3 of the book of James, so grab a Bible and join us there as we begin our message, The Power of the Tongue. Here is Jonathan.
If you find yourself in the hospital with a health concern, the doctors might want to check your vital signs, and they might hook you up to a patient monitor, you know, that checks and records vital signs like heart and respiration rate and blood oxygen levels and all the rest. James has been hard at work teaching us a key principle that living faith will give evidence through works. Authentic faith will be proved by the testimony of a changed life. That is, if you want to know if a human heart has faith within, there will be signs to monitor in a person's life. That was James's emphasis last time, if you remember, in the second half of chapter 2. His repeated refrain was this: faith without works is dead. It's there in verse 17 in chapter 2, and it's repeated in the final verse of the chapter. You notice it with me. For as the body apart from the spirit is dead, so also faith without works is dead. If there are no works, the monitor will show a flat line, and faith is dead. So what are the kind of works, the kind of markers that the monitor should show and should be recording as a sign of living faith within? Well, in chapter 2, James emphasized for us the importance of showing loving care and loving concern for the poor and for the marginalized. That was one key evidence of faith. From the start of the letter, James has also made it clear for us that one of the key ways that we will show evidence of our saving faith will be this: it will be through transformed speech. James issued a very direct challenge on that theme in chapter 1 and verse 26. He said this: if anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. Now that same issue, it comes into focus here in chapter 3. If the spiritual doctor is examining the patient for signs of spiritual health and spiritual life, James says this is his advice: be careful to have a very good look at the tongue. That's his emphasis. That's his concern here in chapter 3. Now, James has a great deal to say to us here by way of general principles, but interestingly, he starts with a very specific, a particular warning, a word of special caution, and we need to give attention to that first. We begin with this word of warning concerning the tongue. Verse 1, not many of you should become teachers, my brothers, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. It may be that James was aware that within this particular church, the church he was addressing, there was a desire in the hearts of many to become teachers. Now, that in itself, that's not an uncommon, nor is it a bad aspiration. when we ourselves are helped by the teaching of the Word of God, it's not an unnatural desire to want to be able to go and bring that truth to others, to go and teach. And I have plenty of conversations, and I enjoy these conversations with folk who want to grow in their ability to teach, who want to find opportunities to teach. And that's a wonderful thing. I long for the Lord to raise up teachers for the church. I pray for him to raise up workers for the harvest field. But without wanting to rain too much on our parade here or to dampen this enthusiasm, James does have this word of caution, even a word of warning. It's for the whole congregation, and he says to the whole group, he says, not many of you should become teachers. Some of you, perhaps many of you, might like the idea of teaching. Some of you will have gifts and abilities that would lend themselves to it, but not many of you should do it, says James, and here's why. We who teach will be judged with greater strictness. Now, James is attuned to the fact that our words matter a great deal. They are a key marker of our spiritual life, of saving faith at the end of the day. And teachers, by the very nature of the role, end up doing quite a lot of talking. And while all Christians are expected to be careful in what they say, teachers will be evaluated more closely, will come under greater scrutiny. To use James's language, they will be judged more strictly. Now that is, to be honest, that is almost enough to make me think of sort of shutting off the microphone and going back to my seat, you know. It's a sobering warning, isn't it? But the point is important. Words matter. And the more we speak and the more the people who listen to us then go on and speak, the higher is the risk that our sin will be amplified. And James is thoroughly realistic about the fact that we're all sinful, verse 2. We all stumble in many ways, and how true that is. We must recognize that. We're all a long way, each one of us, from sinless perfection. That's true of me, it's true of you, it's true of each one of us. Even if we don't fall into grievous sin, to dramatic and devastating sin, we all stumble in smaller ways all too often. And since that is true, and if our speech really matters in the sight of God, then not many of us should be sprinting up to the front to get hold of the microphone. I feel the weight of that myself very keenly. We all stumble in many ways, and that is true not least when it comes to the matter of our speech. None of us has perfect control over our tongue. In fact, James goes so far as to say that if we have our speech perfectly under control, we got to be pretty much sinless. We got to have reached perfection if we've done that. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, he's a perfect man, says James, able also to bridle his whole body. Now, for us who teach, and there are many actually within this church fellowship who are engaged in the ministry of teaching, we've got a lot of gifted teachers here in our church. For us who teach, all of us, this is a challenge, this is a warning we need to take very, very seriously. Our words matter. God holds us to a high standard. When we come before God at the judgment seat of Christ and our Christian service is brought under scrutiny, the Lord will take serious account of our words. And so are we being careful? Are we being careful in what we say, mindful of our speech? You know, for those who have a desire to teach, you might be asking yourself the question, do I have the gifts and abilities to be able to communicate well and clearly, to articulate myself well, to capture people's attention and to hold their attention? But James would say this question is far more important. Do you have your words under control in such a way and to such a degree that it is actually safe for you to wield a microphone? The point becomes sharper because I think that those who have the gifts of communication actually sometimes find it harder than average to be self-controlled in the matter of speech. You know, if you're quick with your tongue, quick with your wit, if you have a facility with words and an agile mind, you will actually find it harder than average to hold back, to consider what you say, to exercise careful control over your speech. So the very people who have the gifts of communication, the gifts for teaching, such people are perhaps the most vulnerable to the temptation to speak too quickly, to say too much, to use the tongue to wound the enemy, to win the argument at all cost. And so the point is simply not, do I have the gifts? Are you quick in mind? And so on. The more vitally important consideration is this: if you have the desire to teach, do you have the necessary control over your words? Not many of you should become teachers, warns James. That's his word of warning about the tongue, and I think it's significant for us to hear, important to register. But now James turns to teach us more broadly about the power and the potential, the immense capacity of the tongue.
You're listening to Encounter the Truth with Jonathan Griffiths and a message called The Power of the Tongue, looking at James chapter 3 today. It's part of our series, Doers of the Word, and we'll continue the message in just a moment, so I hope you'll stay with us. You know, one of the things that we find in the Word, in God's Word, is the encouragement to make sure that we're gathering as the local church. But I know we live in a time where church attendance is not what it was, especially before the pandemic. And a lot of churches now make their services available online. So why do we need to prioritize getting back into the church building? Well, that's one of the questions and topics that Jonathan is addressing in his book, Gathered for Good, God's Good Design for the Local Church. Jonathan offers a path that calls Christians to gather. As believers, he reminds us that it's God's design for our lives to gather, to serve, to commit, and above all, that it's God's gift to his people, that gathering is for our own good. We'd love to send you a copy of Jonathan's book, Gathered for Good, as our way of saying thank you for your financial support this month. You can give online at encounterthetruth.org or when you call us at 1-833-99-TRUTH. That's 1-833-998-7884 or encounterthetruth.org. Let's get back to the message. Again, here is Jonathan.
Now James turns to teach us more broadly about the power and the potential, the immense capacity of the tongue. Three important lessons about the capacity of the tongue, and the first one is this: the tongue has huge capacity to give direction. Verse 3. If we put bits into the mouths of horses so that they obey us, we guide their whole bodies as well. Look at the ships also. Though they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are guided by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet boasts of great things. I know a few in our congregation ride horses. I recounted the other day my recent opportunity to go for a little trail ride. And if you've ever been riding, you know the experience of guiding the horse through the bit and bridle and then by the reins. A small tug on the reins, and this massive animal adjusts its steps, changes its course. Here in Ottawa, we live not far from a major shipping route. The St. Lawrence River is just 45 minutes or whatever down the road. The Great Lakes and St. Lawrence shipping route carries something like $100 billion worth of goods each year. And the ships that enable that movement of goods are big ships. Huge, up to 740 feet in length, I gather. That's the maximum length that will get through the locks. And it's great fun, isn't it, to drive down the river and to catch sight of some of those great vessels as they are underway. But the ships of the Great Lakes are, of course, dwarfed by some of the great cargo ships that sail the open seas. I understand the largest cargo ship ever built was built in Japan, named the Seawise Giant. Greater in length than many skyscrapers are in height, measuring fully 1,500 feet long. The scale of these ships is breathtaking. The sheer bulk, the dimensions, the tonnage. But the wonder of a ship like that is actually that it is possible to steer it and to direct it. Through the winds and the waves, from port to port all around the world, these ships are controlled and these ships are guided. And as I reflected on this, it struck me, the basic principles of navigating a ship on its journey haven't really changed all that much since James took up his pen to write his letter. He encourages us, verse 4, to stop and look at the ships. Pause as you go down to the St. Lawrence. Observe what's going on. Verse 4, though they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are guided by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. Tug on the wheel, and the rudder shifts position, and the mighty ship turns upon the seas. When you consider the tongue in the context of the human body, the whole body, it's a small thing, seemingly insignificant, often hidden from sight. It makes the occasional dramatic appearance when an ice cream cone needs to be consumed, or when a parent's back is turned and a child is in an impish frame of mind. But it's not a prominent member, I guess. And yet its capacity is immense. Verse 5. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. Now, in a sense, the boast of the tongue is actually justified. Despite its size, it really can accomplish a great deal. And the illustration of the horse with the bit and bridle and the ship with its rudder, the illustrations point to the fact that the tongue has the capacity to guide the whole body. As the bit guides the horse, as the rudder guides the great ship, so the tongue sets the direction for the whole of life. Our words set the direction of our action. They are the outpouring of our emotion and our will and the thoughts of our heart. Our speech paves the way for all that will follow, for all that we will do, for all the relationships that we will make and the relationships we will break, for the decisions we will take and the consequences that will follow, for the promises we make and the commitments we undertake. The tongue speaks, and the whole body, the whole person must follow. And as we just think about what James is saying, as we just let all that kind of sink in a little bit, we recognize more and more why it is that he places so much emphasis on the tongue, on speech in his letter. Faith, it's got to issue in works. That's his kind of core principle in the letter. It's got to issue in fruit, in action. And the activity of our tongue, the words that it produces, this is front and center in James's mind, of great importance. And it's why I think he says in verse 2 that if anyone actually manages not to stumble at all in what he says, he's a perfect man, able to bridle his whole body. Friends, if we actually have our tongue under control, there is a real sense in which we have ourselves under control. The tongue is the bit and bridle of the human life. It is the rudder of the person. And if the tongue has this great power to guide the rest of our being, here's the question then, isn't it? Have you got your tongue under control? Have I got my tongue under control? You see, I think we easily assume, don't we, that our words are small things. You know, they come and they go. We don't see them, we don't feel them in a tangible way. They're like the breath of the air. We imagine that they're peripheral or ephemeral, insignificant, unimportant. But James says, oh no, they're the foundation. They are the guide for everything else. And so, friends, we must ask ourselves, are we paying attention to what we are saying? Are you paying attention to what your tongue is doing? And am I? Have you got it under control? If the answer is no, I can tell you something about yourself. Even if I know nothing else about you, I know this. You don't have the rest of your life under control. The tongue has huge capacity to give direction. Next, the tongue has huge capacity to cause destruction. Second half of verse 5. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire, and the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. About a year ago, I think, the Zog wildfire in Northern California burned through 56,000 acres, destroyed over 200 structures, and claimed 4 lives. It all started when a pine tree fell on an electrical line, sparking a blaze in a season of dryness. Pacific Gas and Electric have recently been charged with manslaughter and other felonies for failing to cut down the tree when warned of the danger. A single spark, a great fire. We know how easily it happens. The spark may be small, but the fire could end up being immense. A single spark could come from our mouths that lights an immense fire of destruction. That's the point that James is making. And a word or two spoken in haste, spoken in anger, an unguarded slip, an uncontrolled outburst, an indiscretion, a barbed comment, it can break relationships, it can undermine a marriage, it can threaten a company, it can tear apart a church. It doesn't take much, does it? A small spark, great blaze. One of our nation's most prominent corporations is undergoing a very public boardroom row. At the moment, it's been all over the news. Billions of dollars in market value are at stake. A major merger and acquisitions deal hangs in the balance. Tens of thousands of jobs rely upon the health of the company. Millions of customers require their services. And if you read the reports, at the core of the crisis is this: a pocket dial of a cell phone and a few unguarded words overheard. Tiny spark, massive blaze. The fire begins with the mouth, verse 6. The whole body is affected. The course of life is suddenly set, and how easily that happens. Word is spoken in haste, an ungodly word, an unwise word, and the direction of life is changed in an instant. Life is actually set on fire. And what James says at the end of verse 6 is truly fearful. The fire, the spark, issued from the mouth, it actually has its source in hell. And so the life transformed by this ungodly spark, it is now a light with a blaze that has its origin in the place of darkness. One of the core traditions you will know of the Olympic Games is for a torch to be lit on Mount Olympia in Greece, and then the torch alight with that flame is carried in a great relay from country to country. Unless, of course, it blows out, then they have to relight it. But anyway, before then, lighting the cauldron at the Games itself. Now, what is James saying? He's saying that a life ruined and destroyed by words of ungodliness is a life that is actually aflame with a hellish fire. It's a life that carries hell's torch in this world. The fire of hell can be felt in the life that is set ablaze by words of unrighteousness. And without repentance and without saving faith, that life will be destined for the place of unrighteousness. That's what James is saying. And it's a fearful image he gives us. It's a terrifying thought. James is warning us here of the dangerous power and capacity of the tongue.
Jonathan Griffiths here on Encounter the Truth, and part of a message called The Power of the Tongue, taking a look at the first 12 verses of James chapter 3 today. Well, if you ever miss a broadcast in our series, Doers of the Word, come and listen online. Our website is encounterthetruth.org. Well, Encounter the Truth is able to be on this station, make the app available, the website, and all the resources to help you grow in your walk with Christ because of your financial generosity. And as you give a gift of any amount this month, we want to send you a copy of Jonathan's new book. It's called Gathered for Good. And Jonathan, who'd you write this book for?
Well, it's written with a number of different types of people actually in mind. The book itself casts a biblical vision for what it is to be part of the local church and to participate in the life of the local church. And I've got a few different people in mind for the book. And this may be you as a listener. This may just apply to you. There will be some who are believers in Jesus Christ, but who are not at the present time committed to involvement in a local church. Maybe you're listening to podcasts and radio broadcasts, which is great. Maybe you're watching services online, but you're not actually part of a local church. And maybe you need some convincing as to why it is important to be part of a local church. Maybe you're asking that question. You know, you're being fed and encouraged by different resources and you have friends who are Christians, but church itself, you can't see why. Well, I think it's a good question. You know, why? Why is it important? This book strives to give an answer from the Scriptures. For others, you're involved in the life of the local church and you're giving and you're serving and you're participating, but you don't have a clear understanding biblically why it is you're doing these things and why you ought to continue doing them. And I trust that this book will be a refresher and an encouragement to say, yes, I'm all in the life of the local church, and I want to redouble my efforts to serve God's people here. I trust that'll be an encouragement. And then I think for the Christian leader, for the pastor, for the teacher, for the elder, who's trying to encourage others under their care to make a real commitment to the life of the local church. And you're trying to think through, well, how do I argue for this from Scripture? What's the biblical basis for this? And how do I cast a vision for the people under my care? I trust that this book will be a guide and a resource for you to enable you to do that as a shepherd, as a leader.
Well, we want to send you a copy of Jonathan's new book, Gathered for Good, as our way of saying thank you for your financial support. You can call us at 1-833-99-TRUTH or give online at encounterthetruth.org. That's 1-833-998-7884 or encounterthetruth.org. You can also write us at Encounter the Truth, 2176 Prince of Wales Drive, Ottawa, Ontario, K2E0A1, or in the U.S. at Encounter the Truth, 215 North Arlington Heights Road, number 102, Arlington Heights, Illinois, 60004. For Jonathan Griffiths and our producer Mark Bretta, I'm Steve Hiller. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us next time.